The 72 hours passed like a nightmare that moved too slowly and too quickly at the same time. Admiral Blake positioned the human fleet in a defensive formation around Valoran Prime, knowing full well that they were preparing for a battle they could not win. The 16 human ships looked tiny compared to the Keth-Moran war fleet that waited at the edge of the system like hungry predators. Jake Morrison spent those final hours helping coordinate the defense of New Haven Colony, despite knowing that evacuation was impossible for the Valorans. Every human ship that could be spared was loaded with as many civilians as possible. The lucky ones would escape to tell the story of what happened here. Dr. Lisa Carter worked frantically in the Crystal Archives, downloading centuries of Valoran history and scientific knowledge into portable storage devices. If the worst happened, at least some record of this beautiful civilization might survive. The Valorans helped her, their shell patterns flickering between colors that meant sadness and gratitude. "We understand why you stay," Ziktar told her as they worked. "Your species chooses to fight beside friends even when victory seems impossible. This is why we welcomed you to our world." Commander Alex Hayes had converted the colony's community center into a command post. His security teams were spread across the settlement, knowing they would be the first line of defense when the Keth-Morans landed. The weapons they carried were designed for peacekeeping, not war, but they were all they had. When the attack began, it came without warning or ceremony. The Keth-Moran fleet simply opened fire on the human ships with devastating energy weapons that cut through shields and hull plating like they were made of paper. Admiral Blake's flagship, the USS Constitution, returned fire along with the rest of the fleet, but their weapons barely scratched the enemy's advanced armor. Jake watched from the colony's observation deck as bright flashes lit up the darkness of space. Each flash meant another human ship dying, another crew of good people who had chosen to stay and fight for their friends. The battle was one-sided and brutal, lasting only minutes before the first Keth-Moran landing craft began descending toward the planet's surface. The aliens that emerged from those craft were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. They stood nearly 8 feet tall on powerful legs, with thick reptilian skin covered in natural armor plates. Their heads were elongated with rows of sharp teeth, and their eyes glowed with an intelligence that was both clever and cruel. They carried weapons that fired bolts of superheated plasma, and they moved with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat. Alex's security teams opened fire as soon as the Keth-Morans reached the colony's outer buildings. The sound of human rifles and alien weapons echoed across the crystal gardens that had once been places of peace and learning. But human bullets barely dented the Keth-Moran armor, while their return fire cut down the defenders with terrible efficiency. Jake found himself fighting alongside Valorans who had never held weapons before this day. The peaceful insectoid beings tried to help, but their crystal-based tools were useless against armored invaders. He watched Ziktar attempt to protect a group of Valoran younglings, only to be struck down by a plasma bolt that shattered his beautiful shell into glowing fragments. The Keth-Moran advance was methodical and merciless. They moved through the colony building by building, and what they did in each building made Jake's stomach turn with horror. These were not soldiers capturing territory, they were exterminators removing what they saw as pests. Dr. Carter had been working in the deep archives when the attack began. She made her way toward the surface through crystal corridors that echoed, with screams and weapons fire. When she reached the main plaza, she saw something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. A group of Keth-Moran soldiers had gathered a family of Valorans in the center of the square. 2 adults and 3 younglings, their shells dulled with fear. The Keth-Morans were not killing them quickly or mercifully. They were taking their time, enjoying the terror they were causing. One of the aliens spoke in a harsh, guttural language, and his companions laughed at whatever joke he had made. Carter hid behind a crystal formation and activated her recording device. She knew that if she survived this day, someone needed to witness what was happening here. Someone needed to remember. The Kethmaran commander, identifiable by the additional armor plates across his shoulders, approached the Valoran family. He spoke again in his alien language, then switched to heavily accented but understandable human speech. "You weak creatures thought the humans could protect you?" he said, his voice filled with contempt. "But humans are just as weak as you are. Watch your defenders die and know that your species dies with them." What happened next was burned into Carter's memory forever. The Kethmorans killed the Valoran family slowly, methodically, making sure each member watched the others die first. The younglings' light patterns flickered desperately as they called for their parents, but there was no help coming. Carter recorded it all, tears streaming down her face as she watched friends and colleagues being slaughtered like animals. She recorded the systematic destruction of the crystal gardens, the burning of the libraries, the casual murder of civilians who had never harmed anyone. Meanwhile, above the planet, the space battle was reaching its inevitable conclusion. Captain Morrison's USS Liberty had taken heavy damage, with fires burning on multiple decks and half the crew dead or injured. But Jake continued to fight, targeting the Kethmoran landing craft and trying to prevent more troops from reaching the surface. Admiral Blake's voice crackled over the damaged communication system. "All remaining ships, this is Admiral Blake. We cannot win this fight, but we can make them remember us. Prepare for ramming speed." Jake understood immediately. With their weapons useless and their ships dying around them, the only way left to hurt the enemy was to crash into them. He gave the order to his remaining crew to abandon ship, but most chose to stay at their posts. "Captain," said Lieutenant Pete Johnson from the weapons console, "it's been an honor serving with you." "The honor was mine," Jake replied, then activated the ship's intercom. "All hands, this is the captain. We came to this system as explorers and diplomats. We die here as warriors defending our friends. Earth will remember what happened here. Earth will remember what they did to the Valorans." The USS Liberty's engines roared to full power as Jake aimed the damaged ship at the largest Kethmaran dreadnought. The alien vessel tried to move out of the way, but the distance was too short and the Liberty too fast. The collision tore both ships apart in a brilliant explosion that lit up the night sky over New Haven Colony. Admiral Blake followed Jake's example minutes later, ramming the USS Constitution into another enemy ship. One by one, the remaining human vessels made their final desperate attacks, each one taking at least one Kethmaran ship with them into death. Dr. Carter watched the explosions from her hiding place and knew that humanity's small fleet was gone. The colony's communications array had been destroyed early in the attack, so there was no way to send word to Earth about what was happening. She activated her emergency beacon, hoping against hope that someone would find it and learn the truth. Commander Hayes made his last stand at the colony's medical center, where he and a handful of security officers tried to protect the wounded. The Kethmarans found them there as the sun was setting, painting the crystal spires in shades of red that looked too much like blood. "Come on, then," Hayes said, raising his rifle as the alien soldiers approached. "Let's finish this." The fighting continued through the night, but by dawn, New Haven Colony was silent except for the crackling of fires and the occasional footstep of Kethmaran soldiers searching for survivors. The beautiful crystal spires lay shattered on the ground like broken dreams. Carter remained hidden in the deep archives for 2 more days, listening to the sounds of systematic destruction above her. The Kethmorans were not content with simply killing everyone. They were erasing every trace that humans and Valorans had ever lived together in peace. On the 3rd day, she heard the sound of shuttle engines and carefully made her way to the surface. The colony that had been her home for 3 years was gone, replaced by smoking ruins and scattered crystal fragments. The Kethmoran ships were leaving, their work of extermination complete. Carter found an intact emergency pod in the wreckage of the spaceport and activated its distress beacon. She had her recordings, her data files, and a burning need to reach Earth and tell them what had happened here. As the pod's engines carried her away from the dead world, she looked back one last time at the ruins of New Haven Colony. "I will remember," she whispered to the empty darkness. "Earth will remember, and Earth will make them pay." Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty and watched the twin suns of Valoran Prime paint the sky in shades of gold and purple. The sight never got old, even after 3 years of calling this system home. Through the large viewing window, he could see the crystal spires of New Haven Colony rising from the planet's surface like gleaming needles reaching toward the stars. The colony was humanity's first real success story beyond Earth's solar system. Unlike the mining, operations on distant asteroids, or the research stations orbiting gas giants, New Haven was something special. It was home. Real homes where families lived and children played and people built lives that mattered. Jake turned as Dr. Lisa Carter entered the bridge, her face bright with excitement. She carried a data tablet in her hands and practically bounced on her feet as she approached him. "Jake, you have to see this," she said, holding up the tablet. "The Valorans just shared their latest agricultural data with us. They figured out how to make Earth crops grow 30% faster in their soil." Jake smiled and took the tablet. The screen showed complex charts and graphs that meant little to him, but he could see the enthusiasm in Lisa's eyes. She had been working with the Valoran scientists for 2 years now, ever since humanity first made contact with the peaceful insectoid race that called this world home. "That's great news, Lisa. Does this mean we can expand the farming sector sooner than planned?" "Much sooner," Lisa replied. "And the best part is, the Valorans want to learn how to grow Earth vegetables in return. They're fascinated by tomatoes and corn. Ziktar told me yesterday that his clutch siblings have never tasted anything like strawberries." Jake chuckled. The thought of the tall, mantis-like Valorans carefully tending strawberry plants was both amusing and heartwarming. When humanity first encountered the Valorans 15 years ago, nobody knew what to expect. First contact protocols had been written and rewritten dozens of times, but reality was always different from theory. The Valorans had been curious rather than afraid. Their crystal-like carapaces shimmered in the light as they approached the human landing party with what could only be described as wonder. They communicated through a combination of clicking sounds and light patterns that flickered across their shells, and within weeks, both species had worked together to create translation devices. What followed was unlike anything humanity had experienced before. The Valorans didn't want to trade for advanced technology or weapons. They wanted to share knowledge about art, music, and philosophy. They showed humans how to cultivate crystals that could store incredible amounts of information, while humans taught them about literature and storytelling. Commander Alex Hayes approached from the tactical station, his expression more serious than usual. As head of security for the colony, Alex took his job seriously. But he rarely looked worried. Today was different. "Captain, We're receiving a transmission from Admiral Susan Blake's flagship. She wants to speak with you privately." Jake frowned. Admiral Blake commanded the small human fleet that protected the Valoran system. She was a seasoned officer who didn't call for private conversations unless something important was happening. "Put her through to my ready room," Jake said. He handed the tablet back to Lisa and headed toward the small office connected to the bridge. The door slid shut behind him as he activated the communication console. Admiral Blake's face appeared on the screen, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and her blue eyes serious. She had commanded ships for over 30 years, and Jake had never seen her look quite this concerned. "Jake, we have a problem. Long-range sensors have detected a large fleet entering the outer edge of the system. They're not responding to our hail attempts, and their ship configurations don't match any known friendly species." Jake felt his stomach tighten. "How large is large, Admiral?" 47 vessels, including at least 12 that appear to be Dreadnought class. They're moving in formation toward Valoran Prime, and they're armed for war. The implications hit Jake immediately. The human fleet in the system consisted of only 16 ships, most of them exploration vessels with minimal combat capabilities. If these unknown ships meant harm, humanity was vastly outgunned. "What are your orders, Admiral?" "I'm moving the fleet to intercept them at the fourth moon. We need to buy time to figure out their intentions. I want you to begin evacuation preparations for the colony, but do it quietly. No need to panic the civilians yet." Jake nodded, though his mind was racing. New Haven Colony had over 50,000 human residents, plus nearly 30,000 Valorans who lived in the integrated districts. Evacuating that many people would take days, even with every available ship. "Understood, Admiral. What about our Valoran friends?" Blake's expression grew even more serious. "That's the difficult part, Jake. I've already spoken with Ziktar about this. The Valorans consider Valoran Prime to be sacred. It's not just their homeworld, it's their holy world. They won't leave." Jake closed his eyes for a moment. The Valorans had explained their connection to their world many times. Their eggs were laid in special crystal chambers deep underground, and their young absorbed minerals from the planet that became part of their shells. To a Valoran, leaving their homeworld was like asking a human to cut off their own arm. "Sir, we can't just abandon them." "I know, Jake. But if these ships are hostile, we might not have a choice." The transmission ended, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts. He stared out the small window in his ready room, watching the daily life of the colony continue below. Human children played in the parks alongside young Valorans, their different species united by the simple joy of games and friendship. Human and Valoran adults worked side by side in the crystal gardens, sharing knowledge and building something beautiful together. 3 hours later, everything changed. Jake was in the colony's main meeting hall with Lisa, Alex, and several Valoran leaders when the emergency alert sounded. The harsh tone echoed through the crystal corridors, and every human in the room immediately reached for their communication devices. Admiral Blake's voice crackled through the speakers, tense with barely controlled anger. "All stations, this is Admiral Blake. The unknown fleet has identified themselves as the Kethmaran Empire. They are demanding immediate human evacuation from the Valoran system. They claim this space belongs to them now." Ziktar, the tall Valoran who served as the colony's liaison, made a series of rapid clicking sounds that the translation device rendered as distress and confusion. His shell flickered with patterns of red and orange light. "The Kethmorans," he said in his translated voice. "We know of them. They are conquerors who enslave other worlds. They have never come to this sector before." Lisa grabbed Jake's arm. What does this mean for the colony? Before Jake could answer, Admiral Blake's voice continued. They're giving us 72 hours to remove all human presence from the system. After that, they say they will remove us themselves. Alex stepped forward, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. Captain, what are our defensive capabilities? Jake looked around the room at the faces staring back at him. Humans and Valorans who had built lives together, who had shared their cultures and dreams. The idea of abandoning all of this to unknown, aliens who made threats seemed impossible. Admiral, Jake said into his communicator, what if we refuse? The silence that followed stretched for long seconds before Blake responded. Jake, they have us outgunned 5-1. These aren't exploration ships we're facing. These are warships built for conquest. Ziktar's shell patterns shifted to deep blue, which Jake had learned meant determination mixed with sadness. Captain Morrison, my people cannot leave this world. Our eggs are in the deep chambers. Our ancestors are buried in the crystal caves. To leave Valoran Prime would mean the end of our species. Jake felt the weight of impossible choices settling on his shoulders. Abandon their friends to save human lives or stay and face an enemy they couldn't hope to defeat. He looked at Lisa, who had tears in her eyes as she stared at her Valoran colleagues. He looked at Alex, whose jaw was set in determination. He looked at the Valorans, whose light patterns showed fear, but also absolute resolve. Admiral Blake, Jake said quietly, the Valorans won't evacuate. This is their sacred world. Another long pause, then Blake's voice, steady but heavy with the burden of command. Then God help us all, Jake, because if we stay, we're going to war. The emergency pod carrying Dr. Lisa Carter drifted through space for 18 days before a human patrol ship found her. By then, she had watched her recordings of the Valoran massacre dozens of times, each viewing burning the images deeper into her memory. The rescue crew found her staring at the small screen, tears long since dried on her cheeks, her voice hoarse from whispering the names of friends who would never come home. Captain Danny Clark commanded the patrol vessel that picked up Carter's distress signal. He had served in the outer colonies for 7 years and thought he had seen everything the galaxy could throw at humanity. But when Carter showed him the recordings from New Haven colony, he found himself staring at images that his mind struggled to process. Dear God, he whispered, as the footage showed Keth-Moran soldiers methodically executing Valoran families. How many people were in the colony? Carter's voice was hollow when she answered. 53,000 humans, 29,000 Valorans, all dead. Every single one of them dead because they wouldn't abandon their friends. The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks, and during that time, Carter worked with the ship's communication officer to prepare her report. She organized her recordings by location and time, creating a comprehensive record of the massacre that would leave no doubt about what had happened on Valoran Prime. When they reached Earth, Carter was immediately brought before the United Earth Assembly. President Martha Collins had called an emergency session, and representatives from every human colony and space station were present via holographic link. The great assembly hall had never been so full or so quiet. Carter stood at the central podium, still wearing the torn and stained clothes she had escaped in. Her hands shook slightly as she activated the presentation system, but her voice was steady and clear. Honorable representatives, I am Dr. Lisa Carter, formerly the chief xenobiologist at New Haven Colony on Valoran Prime. I am here to report the complete extermination of our colony and the genocide of our Valoran allies by an enemy calling themselves the Kethmaran Empire. The chamber remained silent as Carter began her presentation. The footage she had recorded played on massive screens throughout the hall, showing the systematic slaughter of peaceful civilians, the casual cruelty of the alien invaders, and the desperate final moments of human defenders who chose death over abandonment of their friends. President Collins watched with tears streaming down her face as the images showed Valoran younglings crying out for parents who could no longer protect them. Assembly members who had spent their careers debating trade agreements and colonial development policies found themselves staring at raw footage of evil that demanded action. When the presentation ended, the assembly hall remained silent for nearly a full minute. Then President Collins stood, her face hard with determination that few had ever seen before. Dr. Carter, on behalf of Earth and all human colonies, I thank you for bringing us this testimony. The courage you showed in recording these events, and the sacrifice of every human who died defending our friends, will not be forgotten. Collins turned to address the full assembly. Representatives, we have spent decades building a peaceful civilization among the stars. We have explored new worlds, made contact with alien species, and tried to be good neighbors in a vast galaxy. But today we learn that there are forces in this universe that see our kindness as weakness and our friendship as foolishness. The president's voice grew stronger with each word. The Kethmaran Empire made a grave error when they slaughtered the Valorans. They believed they were eliminating a threat to their expansion. Instead, they have awakened something in humanity that has slept since our ancestors first learned to defend their tribes from predators. Within hours of the assembly session, emergency orders went out to every human world and facility. The peaceful exploration and colonization that had defined humanity's expansion into space was suspended indefinitely. Every resource, every factory, every research station was to be converted to military production. General Nathan Cross had been enjoying his retirement on Luna City when the call came. At 68 years old, he had served humanity for 4 decades before stepping down to write his memoirs and tend his small garden. But when President Collins personally asked him to take command of Earth's military response to the Kethmaran threat, he did not hesitate. Madam President, I accept the position on one condition, he said during their private meeting. We do this properly. No half measures, no political interference, no rules of engagement that favor the enemy. If humanity goes to war, we go to win. Collins nodded grimly. General, you have complete authority to build whatever military force you deem necessary. The only limit is what Earth and her colonies can provide. Cross smiled for the first time since seeing Carter's recordings. Then the Kethmarans are about to learn what happens when you threaten human families. The transformation began immediately. Mars Colony, which had spent decades terraforming the Red Planet and building agricultural domes, converted its massive industrial complexes to weapons production. The asteroid mining operations that had provided raw materials for peaceful construction now focused entirely on military shipbuilding. Chief Engineer Ryan Torres led the technical response from the lunar shipyards. Before the massacre, he had designed exploration vessels and research platforms. Now he studied every piece of wreckage recovered from the Valoran system, reverse engineering Kethmaran technology and finding ways to counter their superior weapons. The key is mobility, Torres explained to his engineering teams. Their ships are bigger and more heavily armed, but they're also slower and less maneuverable. We build smaller, faster ships that can hit them from multiple angles and avoid their heaviest weapons. Dr. Rachel Stone, a former colleague of Carter's, volunteered for a very different kind of service. She analyzed the behavioral patterns of the Kethmoran soldiers captured in Carter's recordings, looking for psychological weaknesses that could be exploited. "They're supremacists," Stone reported to the Military Planning Committee. "They believe they are inherently superior to all other species. That arrogance is a weakness we can use against them. They won't expect inferior species to fight back. Effectively, the surviving Valorans played a crucial role in Earth's preparation for war. Only 47 members of their species had escaped the massacre, but they provided invaluable intelligence about Kethmoran technology and tactics. Zilnara, who had lost her entire family in the colony, worked 18-hour days helping human. Engineers understand alien weapon systems. "My people were peaceful by nature," she told General Cross during one of their planning sessions. "But we learned much about the galaxy during our long history. The Kethmorans have conquered 17 worlds in the past century. They always follow the same pattern: overwhelming force, complete extermination, and systematic destruction of all records that their victims ever existed." Cross leaned forward with interest. "What happened to the species they conquered before?" "Gone," Zilnara replied, her shell patterns flickering with colors that meant deep sadness. "Completely extinct. The Kethmorans do not take prisoners or allow survivors. They see other sapient life as a contamination that must be cleansed from the galaxy." Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster took charge of training the new Earth Marine Corps. Before the massacre, she had been a peacekeeping officer who specialized in conflict resolution and crowd control. Now she trained soldiers for a very different kind of mission. "Forget everything you learned about rules of engagement," she told her recruits. "The enemy we face does not recognize surrender, does not take prisoners, and does not show mercy to civilians. They are not soldiers fighting for a cause. They are exterminators clearing what they see as pests from the galaxy." Foster's training regimen was brutal by previous standards, but necessary for the war they were preparing to fight. Her Marines learned to use captured alien weapons, to fight in the low gravity of space stations, and to maintain discipline even when facing an enemy that had committed atrocities against their friends. The industrial mobilization exceeded every projection. Within 6 months, Earth's shipyards were producing warships at a rate that would have been impossible during peacetime. The new vessels bore names that honored the fallen: Valoran's Revenge, Never Forget, Carter's Justice, and dozens of others that carried the memory of the massacre into battle. President Collins made regular addresses to the human colonies, keeping morale high and unity strong during the massive effort. But her most important speech came exactly 1 year after the massacre, as the first ships of the new fleet prepared to launch. "Citizens of Earth and all human worlds," she began, standing before a backdrop that showed the sleek warships waiting in orbit. "1 year ago, we learned that our peaceful approach to the galaxy had limits. We discovered that there are forces in the universe that mistake kindness for weakness and friendship for foolishness." Collins paused, her eyes hard with determination. "The Kethmoran Empire believed they could slaughter our friends and intimidate us into submission. They thought that by destroying one human colony and one alien species, they could teach us to fear them." The president's voice grew stronger. "They were wrong. They did not." Admiral Kelly Barnes had been a captain commanding a small patrol ship when the Valoran massacre happened. Now she stood on the bridge of the Earth warship Retribution and watched her fleet of 60 vessels approach the outer edge of Kethmoran, space. The transformation from peaceful exploration officer to admiral of a war fleet had taken 2 years, but every day of training and preparation had led to this moment. Admiral called Lieutenant Commander Pete Johnson from the tactical station. Long-range sensors are picking up Keth-Moran activity around the third planet of this system. Looks like some kind of military outpost. Barnes studied the sensor readings on her command screen. The outpost appeared to be lightly defended, probably used as a supply depot for Keth-Moran expansion fleets. It was exactly the kind of target Earth's strategists had identified as ideal for their first strike. "Signal the fleet," Barnes ordered. "We go in silent and fast. I want those installations destroyed before they can send a distress call." The human fleet moved with precision that would have impressed the old Earth Space Command. But these ships were not built for exploration or diplomacy. Every vessel in the formation was designed for one purpose: killing Keth-Morans. Commander Maria Santos led the boarding teams aboard the assault ship Vengeance. Her Marines had trained for 18 months specifically for fighting Keth-Moran soldiers in confined spaces. Each warrior carried weapons designed to penetrate alien armor, and training that emphasized speed and aggression over traditional military courtesy. "Remember what they did to the Valorans," Santos told her troops as they prepared to assault the enemy outpost. "Every single one of these monsters had a hand in genocide. Show them the same mercy they showed our friends." The attack began without warning. Earth's stealth ships had approached to within weapons range before the Keth-Moran sensors detected them. By then, it was far too late for the aliens to mount any effective defense. Captain Danny Clark commanded the destroyer Fury as it led the opening barrage. The new human weapons, based on reverse-engineered alien technology, but improved by Earth engineering, tore through Keth-Moran shields like they were made of paper. The aliens' outer defensive platforms exploded in brilliant flashes of light, their debris raining down on the planet below. "Target their communications array," Clark ordered his weapons officer. "Make sure no word of this gets back to their home fleet." The Keth-Moran outpost had been built with the assumption that any enemy would announce themselves and demand surrender according to standard galactic warfare protocols. They were completely unprepared for humans who had abandoned such civilized concepts entirely. Santos and her Marines boarded the main station through emergency airlocks that had been blown open by precisely targeted explosives. The Keth-Moran soldiers they encountered fought with the same savage intensity that had made them feared across the galaxy, but they found themselves facing an enemy that matched their brutality with superior tactics and weapons. "Contact front," shouted Sergeant Ryan Torres as his squad encountered a group of alien defenders in the station's main corridor. The Keth-Morans opened fire with their plasma weapons, but the humans had studied their tactics for 2 years and knew exactly how to counter them. Torres and his Marines used the station's own architecture against the defenders, forcing them into crossfire situations where their superior armor became useless. The fighting was close and vicious, exactly the kind of combat that humans had evolved for during millions of years of tribal warfare on Earth. Admiral Barnes watched the assault from her command chair, feeling a grim satisfaction as her tactical displays showed Keth-Moran resistance crumbling throughout the outpost. But this was only the beginning. Intelligence suggested that this system was just one of dozens of military installations that supported Keth-Moran expansion into this sector of the galaxy. "Admiral," called the communications officer. "We're receiving a transmission from the planet surface. It's not Keth-Moran." Barnes frowned. "Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was translated by the universal communication protocols, but the tone of desperate hope was unmistakable. "Unknown ships, please respond. This is Veltar of the Nexian people. Are you here to liberate us? The revelation that the Kethmarans kept slaves had been expected, but hearing it directly from one of their victims still sent a chill through the bridge crew. Barnes activated her communication system. Veltar, this is Admiral Barnes of the Earth Defense Force. We are here to destroy the Kethmoran military presence in this system. Are there others like you on the planet? Yes, came the eager reply. Thousands of us. We have been forced to work in their mines for 7 years. Please, we know where they keep their supply depots and communication equipment. Barnes smiled coldly. The Kethmarans had made another mistake by keeping intelligent slaves who could provide information about their operations. Veltar, we're sending down teams to secure the planet. Help us find every Kethmaran installation, and we'll make sure they never hurt your people again. The ground assault revealed the true extent of Kethmaran cruelty. Commander Santos and her Marines found labor camps where alien slaves worked under conditions that would have killed most species within weeks. The Nexians, reptilian beings with green scales and large eyes, had survived only because their homeworld had prepared them for harsh conditions. How many of your people did they kill? Santos asked Veltar as they toured one of the liberated camps. In the first year, they killed half of us, Veltar replied, his translated voice heavy with old grief. They said it would motivate the survivors to work harder. After that, they only killed those who became too weak to be useful. Santos felt the familiar rage building in her chest, the same fury that had driven Earth's military buildup for the past 2 years. Don't worry, Veltar. They'll never hurt anyone again. The systematic destruction of the Kethmoran outpost took 3 days. Earth forces disabled every weapon, destroyed every communication device, and eliminated every trace of alien military presence in the system. But more importantly, they gathered intelligence about Kethmaran operations throughout this sector of space. Dr. Rachel Stone, now serving as the fleet's intelligence analyst, worked with liberated slaves from a dozen different species to build a comprehensive picture of enemy capabilities and locations. What she learned was both encouraging and horrifying. The Earth Defense Force fleet that approached the Kethmaran homeworld 3 years after the Valoran massacre was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 400 human warships moved in perfect formation, accompanied by vessels from 18 different species that had joined humanity's crusade against their former oppressors. Admiral Kelly Barnes commanded from the bridge of the dreadnought Valoran's memory, a ship built specifically to carry the war to the heart of the enemy empire. General Nathan Cross had come out of retirement completely to personally oversee the final assault. At 71 years old, he stood on the flagship's observation deck and watched the Kethmaran home system grow larger on the tactical displays. 3 years of planning and preparation had led to this moment, and he intended to see it through to the end. General, said Dr. Lisa Carter, who now served as humanity's chief diplomatic advisor despite her scars from the massacre. We're receiving multiple communication attempts from the Kethmoran government. They want to discuss terms. Cross turned to look at the woman who had survived the slaughter of New Haven Colony and dedicated her life to ensuring it would never happen again. Her hair had gone gray during the long war, and her eyes held a hardness that came from watching friends die for no reason other than an alien empire's arrogance. What kind of terms are they offering, Dr. Carter? Carter activated her data tablet and read from the translated messages. They're willing to withdraw from all conquered territories, pay reparations to affected species, and submit to galactic oversight of their military forces. Cross was quiet for a long moment, then activated the fleet communication system. His voice carried to every ship in the massive formation as he delivered humanity's response to the Kethmoran Empire. "This is General Cross of the Earth Defense Force. We have received your offer to negotiate terms for peace. Our response is simple. There are no terms. You showed our friends no mercy when you slaughtered them on Valoran Prime. We offer you the same courtesy they received." Admiral Barnes, listening from the bridge, felt a grim satisfaction as she watched the tactical displays show Kethmoran ships moving into defensive positions around their homeworld. The enemy had over 200 vessels, including massive super dreadnoughts, that dwarfed anything in the human fleet. But they were defending fixed positions against an enemy that had spent 3 years learning how to kill them efficiently. Commander Maria Santos, now a colonel commanding the 1st Earth Marine Division, prepared her troops for the ground assault that would follow the space battle. Her soldiers had fought on a dozen worlds during the campaign, and each battle had taught them new ways to defeat Kethmoran tactics. "Remember why we're here," she told her assembled officers. "Every Kethmoran on that planet participated in or supported the genocide of peaceful species. They created this war when they decided that other forms of life were unworthy to exist. Today we finish what they started. The space battle began exactly as Earth's strategists had planned. Instead of a direct assault on the Kethmoran fleet, human ships used their superior speed and coordination to attack the enemy's orbital installations. First, Captain Danny Clark led a squadron of destroyers in strikes against the weapon platforms that protected the planet's surface, while Captain Pete Johnson's stealth ships eliminated enemy communication relays. The Kethmorans, accustomed to fighting, enemies who followed traditional galactic warfare doctrines, found themselves facing tactics that seemed to come from nowhere. Human ships appeared and disappeared like ghosts, striking at critical targets and vanishing before enemy reinforcements could respond. "Sir, their defensive network is fragmenting," reported the tactical officer aboard Admiral Barnes's flagship. "Colonel Santos's Marines are ready to begin ground operations." Barnes nodded grimly. "Signal all assault ships. Begin planetary landing operations. I want every Kethmoran military installation on that world destroyed within 72 hours. The ground invasion of the Kethmoran homeworld was swift and merciless. Santos's Marines had studied enemy tactics for 3 years and knew exactly how to counter every defensive strategy the aliens might employ. But more importantly, they fought with a controlled fury that their enemies could not match. Private Ryan Torres, nephew of the engineer who had helped design Earth's new warships, found himself fighting through the corridors of a Kethmoran command center alongside soldiers from 6 different species. The coalition that humanity had built during the war included former slaves, conquered peoples, and species that had lived in fear of Kethmoran expansion for decades. "Contact front," shouted. Sergeant Amy Foster as her squad encountered a group of Kethmoran defenders. The aliens fought with the same savage intensity that had made them feared throughout the galaxy, but they were facing an enemy that had learned to match their brutality with superior weapons and tactics. The fighting was house to house and room to room, as Earth forces systematically dismantled the Kethmoran military structure. Every weapons factory, every training facility, every research center that had contributed to the Empire's war machine was methodically destroyed. General Cross personally oversaw the assault on the Imperial Palace, where Emperor Vashtok the Conqueror waited with his elite guard. The reptilian ruler who had ordered the destruction of 17 different species over the past century now faced the consequences of his final mistake. Emperor Vashtok, Cross said as human Marines secured the throne room. "I am General Nathan, Cross of Earth. I'm here to deliver a message from the friends you murdered on Valoran Prime." The Kethmoran Emperor, standing nearly 9 feet tall in ceremonial armor, glared at the human general with eyes that burned with hatred and fear. "You cannot destroy us, mammal. We are the rightful rulers of this galaxy. Other species exist, only to serve us or be eliminated." Cross activated a holographic projector that he had carried with him from Earth. The device displayed images of every Valoran civilian killed during the massacre, their faces projected in the air between the human general and the alien emperor. "These are the beings you murdered," Cross said quietly. "Peaceful scientists, artists, teachers, and children who never harmed anyone. They died because your empire decided that friendship between species was a threat to your supremacy." Dr. Carter entered the throne room accompanied by Zilnara, the last surviving Valoran elder who had escaped the massacre 3 years earlier. The sight of the gentle insectoid being, her crystal shell scarred by the trauma of losing her entire species, seemed to affect the Emperor more than any human threat could have. "You," Vashtok said, his voice filled with recognition and contempt. "I remember you. You were in the reports from the Valoran system. I ordered your species exterminated, but apparently some insects escaped the cleansing." Zilnara stepped forward, her shell patterns flickering with colors that meant justice and remembrance. "My people are not extinct, Emperor. We live on in the memory of those who loved us and in the justice that humanity has brought to you." Carter activated her recording device, the same one she had used to document the massacre. "Emperor Vashtok, you are formally charged with genocide against the Valoran people and 17 other species. The sentence is the complete dissolution of your empire and the prevention of any future Kethmaran military expansion." The Emperor's trial was broadcast throughout the galaxy, ensuring that every species would know exactly what had happened and why the Kethmaran Empire had been destroyed. The evidence was overwhelming. 3 years of accumulated testimony from survivors, documented atrocities, and the Emperor's own proud admissions of his role in multiple genocides. Within 6 months, the Kethmaran homeworld had been transformed. From the center of a galactic empire into a supervised world under the protection of the Galactic Security Council. The species was not exterminated, but their military was dissolved and their government restructured to prevent future aggression. Admiral Barnes found herself in command of the largest peacekeeping fleet in galactic history. Human ships patrolled. Trade routes that had been terrorized by Kethmoran raiders for decades, and Earth's military academies began training officers from dozens of species in the tactical innovations that had made victory possible. 5 years after the Valoran massacre, Dr. Carter stood in the memorial garden that had been built on the restored surface of Valoran Prime. New Valoran colonies flourished throughout the sector under Earth's protection, and their species, though forever changed by their losses, had survived and grown stronger. President Martha Collins, now in her 3rd term as leader of United Earth, delivered the dedication speech for the memorial. The Kethmaran Empire believed they were eliminating a threat when they murdered our friends. Instead, they created something they had never encountered before. A species willing to fight not for conquest or territory, but for justice and the memory of the innocent. Collins paused, looking out at the audience of humans, Valorans, and dozens of other species who had gathered for the ceremony. They thought they were destroying us when they killed those we loved. Instead, they forged us into the guardians this galaxy needed. We are no longer just explorers or diplomats. We are the protectors of those who cannot protect themselves.